I'm Dr. Gerry Fishkin, and welcome to my show today. Today's show is on boundaries, personal boundaries. When I was in college, we didn't know about boundaries. Boundaries are a relatively new thing. Really, the idea and the study of boundaries came out of the 12-step program world, where addicts who really don't have boundaries, and we didn't really know about that and what boundaries mean and what they represent in the universe. But folks in treatment typically exhibit no boundaries or have very broken boundary lines. Also, we see in the family therapy that I do, couples, women come in and they're abused, the husbands are violators, the woman has no boundaries established, and the guys walk all over them. Boundaries, what are they? So today's show is on personal boundaries. And by the way, this is not a substitute for psychotherapy. So I want you to understand that as we talk about this may trigger some things in you, some things that you may want to look at if you're in treatment. If you're not in treatment and you want to kind of build up your own set of boundaries and understand what they are, this is the perfect place to look at what boundaries are all about. So I've really designed this show for you. I want you to understand that it's something that affects everybody. So what is this thing that we call boundaries? We define personal boundaries as the emotional, mental, and physical limits we establish to help protect ourselves from being used, manipulated, or violated by others. Boundaries allow us to separate who we are, what we think, what we believe and feel, from the thoughts and feelings of others. We create these boundaries, if we have them, to help identify reasonable, safe, and permissible ways for others to behave toward us, and also how we will respond when someone violates those limits or personal boundaries. Most important, boundaries identify and define our sense of self. Just as countries are defined by their borders, boundaries allow us to know who we are as well as what our personal limits are. Setting personal boundaries takes courage, practice, and support. So let's unpack what personal boundaries are all about. Importance of personal boundaries. Why is it important to set personal boundaries? Well, there are a bunch of factors, and I've laid them all out. Number one, setting personal boundaries is essential if we want to be emotionally and physically healthy. We can't be healthy when we let people walk all over us. We can't be emotionally, mentally, and physically healthy when we are constantly violated, or worse, allow others to violate us. Number two, creating and setting personal boundaries, it's empowering. Through the setting and maintaining of our emotional, mental, and physical boundaries, we protect our self-esteem, maintain our self-respect, and enjoy positive relationships with others. Number three, we can have an equal partnership with others where responsibility and power are shared. When there's an unequal distribution of power in a relationship, that is when somebody in a relationship doesn't feel good about themselves, they feel inadequate, they feel less than, the other partner can walk all over them. And so that's what I mean when I say to you about the equal partnership with others when we have effective boundaries. Number four, by setting healthy boundaries, we separate our needs, thoughts, feelings, and desires from others. By setting healthy boundaries, we become our own person, that our needs, our thoughts, our feelings, our desires become ours. They don't have to be influenced, or they're not influenced, rather, by others. So we own our needs, our thoughts, our feelings, and our desires. We own them through the setting of our personal boundaries. Number 5, boundaries, and this is really important to me. Well, they're all important, but number 5, boundaries allow us to be assertive, confident, and provide us the ability to say yes or no without feeling guilt or fear of rejection or abandonment by others. In other words, you have a right to have a right, period. Number 6, not setting and maintaining healthy boundaries causes emotional pain, humiliation, and loss of self-respect. Most often, this can and will lead to depression, codependency, anxiety, and even stress-induced physical illness, including panic attacks and shame-based behavior, such as addictions and other forms of acting out. And we're going to get into that deeper as we get into the family of origin issues. Boundaries fall within 6 categories: emotional and intellectual, mental, physical, material, sexual, and really important, spiritual boundaries. Most people don't talk about that, but I am. Emotional and intellectual boundaries protect our sense of self-esteem and our ability to separate our feelings from others. These boundaries help us, or help you, separate and protect our emotions, or your emotions and responsibility, from someone else's emotions or negative feelings or problems. In other words, with healthy emotional and intellectual boundaries, we learn that we are only responsible for our own feelings and do not personalize or feel responsible for someone else's feelings. Don't you love it when someone says, "You made me feel that way," or "It's because of you I feel this," or "Because of you I did this"? That's baloney. We're all responsible for what we do. And that's really important when it comes to setting boundaries, so that no one can violate. And you have a right to say, "I am protecting myself." Or as I say it, "I am protecting my sense of self." Mental boundaries protect your thoughts, values, beliefs, and attitudes and opinions. With healthy mental boundaries, you know what you believe and can value that belief system of others without defensiveness and maintaining an open mind. In other words, you know what you believe, you know how you've lived your life, and you don't need anyone else telling you how to be. And you can do that with healthy boundaries without defensiveness, and you can maintain an open mind. Physical boundaries relate to your personal and physical space, including your body, as well as your privacy. Sometimes when people get too close to us, say 17, 18 inches or less, we often feel closed in. Some of this is cultural. There are folks from other parts of the universe who don't have boundary limits, and they'll be right up in your face, and we know that. We've all experienced it. This is what a violation of our personal space feels like. In other words, you know how you feel when somebody gets too close to you. Material boundaries have to do with our personal possessions and what we do with them, including giving or lending our things, such as our car, money, clothes. Even with our closest family members or friends, we learn to say no when no is in our best interest without feeling guilt. You know, it's never a good idea to lend money because basically we're not a bank. So, and I also find that money lending within a friendship or family relationship always leads to a dead end, because it also shows an imbalance of power. And so that's an issue. Sexual boundaries are the limits we set with someone who desires to engage with us intimately. These boundaries put us in control assertively, without undue individual or social pressure, intimidation, or shame. In today's world, and with the Me Too movement, God bless them, I really think it's important that women have a right to protect their bodies, a right to say no. And also, from a legal standpoint, anyone who violates those boundaries should face the legal consequences, the legal and social consequences of their behavior. It's not okay in today's world to violate someone's physical boundaries. Spiritual boundaries are based upon your belief in God or whatever you deem to be your higher power. And most often, and I think we all have a higher power, some don't. I know a lot of folks in recovery, it's one of the areas to have a higher power and to use that higher power in recovery. So we all need to have something that takes us away from our everyday and regular life, something that we believe in that's greater than us, something to look up toward the heavens and believe and understand that there's more to life than just us. Personal boundary dysfunction. What does that mean? Well, current research has shown that what we might call personal boundary dysfunction most often develops early in life within a dysfunctional family environment. And I referred to this earlier. Most often, we find that within a dysfunctional family, the child's needs and feelings are most often subordinated, that is, reduced to the needs, wants, and feelings of the parents. Within this structure, what does the child learn? The child learns that he or she doesn't matter. They may not feel good enough and learn that their needs just don't matter, which means that they don't matter. And that's pretty horrible. And if verbal or physical abuse is present, the child learns to be fearful of authority or with those seen as more powerful. And in that context, the child never learns that they have power, that they have control, that they have autonomy, and they have a sense of self. In my clinical work, I often see this pattern in children who have been bullied and are threatened by setting and maintaining their own boundaries. These individuals, you may know them, frequently fear rejection and abandonment. They're fearful of confrontation, lack self-assertion, and suffer from what we call low self-esteem. On the other hand, when parents don't display effective boundary setting and act as codependents to a demanding child, the child never learns healthy personal boundaries. As adults, these individuals often expect of others the same exalted and unrealistic attention that their parents displayed upon them or gave them. They have the same lack of boundary setting as their parents. These adults also have a very low threshold for frustration and are frequently angry or aggressive. This behavior is the opposite of self-assertion and healthy social behavior. Very often, these are the entitled ones, millennials, often single-parent homes. These children were never raised with healthy boundaries. And so they have a sense of entitlement. But I also see something else, as I've written about in my book, The Science of Shame. They also have a chip on their shoulder. And we'll see more of that as we move through my presentation today. Frequently, and especially within the therapeutic process, we observe that there are those types of individuals who especially need healthy boundary setting. As we've seen from the dysfunctional family process that I just talked about, there are those who have been raised to believe that their needs don't matter and clearly allow other people to take advantage of them. These individuals treat themselves and allow others to treat them in self-effacing ways. Doormats never feel good about themselves and have a very poor sense of self. They are defined by their lack of boundaries. When parents overindulge their children, overprotecting and falsely empowering them, these children develop an inflated sense of self-esteem and entitlement. We often see these enabler codependents in toxic relationships, and frequently in relationship with addicts and other highly dependent individuals. Lastly, we find some individuals who avoid conflict and have no sense of their own identity, including what they need, think, want, or feel. These individuals typically have no sense of self and typically fear self-discovery. Their primary focus is on pleasing others. They tolerate significant disrespect and abuse from others. They lack self-assertion because their sense of self is unknown. Other complicating factors, often related to the lack of effective boundary setting, are associated with individuals suffering from addictions, mental illness, including borderline personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder, as well as individuals who are codependent. Ultimately, as we've seen, not having effective boundaries only leads to humiliation and shame. And I know that because I wrote the book on it. And can lead to shame-based behaviors, including alcoholism and drug addictions, and often toxic personal relationships. Frequently, because of the unequal power distribution, we talked about that earlier, in toxic relationships, boundaryless individuals never assert themselves, further adding to the loss of self-esteem, self-knowledge, and self-respect. Well, this is the important one. Here it is, how to develop healthy boundaries. There are very effective ways to build and preserve healthy boundaries. Primary is the need to be assertive, which may be seen as the most important factor associated with healthy boundaries and healthy boundary setting. When we assert ourselves, we tell the world and we tell ourselves who we are and what our needs are and what our wants are in a proactive and socially respectable way. Self-assertion takes time and practice, as well as support from others. And support can come from family, friends, religious groups, and those with whom you have a safe feeling with, and feel safe with sharing your sense of self. Understand what your limits are, including your physical boundaries and emotional, mental, and spiritual limits. Now, this requires us to practice self-awareness. It's practice, because as it's only through self-knowledge that we can set effective boundaries shaped to our own needs, wants, and desires. So if you're just starting out, start slow, be in a supportive, safe group or with safe people. Let them know what you're trying to do, that you're trying to become more of who you are. And also, in that process, you'll be setting your boundaries. By being direct with others, we leave no doubt as to who we are. Being direct does not mean being aggressive, which is always seen as negative or hostile. Being direct is another form of self-assertion. When we are direct with others, we often find that our interpersonal relationships improve significantly, leaving no room for others to make faulty assumptions about who we are and what we want and don't want. One of the smallest words in any language, and one of the most difficult words to say in any language, is the word no. It takes courage, intention, and practice to say no. Start small and give yourself time and have patience with yourself. You know, like 2-year-olds, when a 2-year-old says no, they immediately empower themselves And depending upon how you were raised, either assertively or aggressively, when you say no, you immediately feel empowered. We love 2-year-olds. We love watching them kind of separate themselves from the universe. And when they say, they don't have a sense of shame or guilt or anything else, they say no. And because they're testing their limits, they're testing themselves. And when parents punish a child for saying no, they are destroying that child's present and future. Please understand that. The knowledge that you have a right to have a right can free you from self-doubts and shame. By accepting the fact that we're on equal footing with others allows us to negate the feelings of being less than. In other words, we don't want to feel less than. So along these lines, we must understand that no one else's needs, wants, values, emotions, or power are more important than our own. Each of us are perfectly imperfect, and no one is better than anyone else. In order to set healthy boundaries, we must understand but not dwell on the past. We must assess our present in order to effectively know what our needs and wants are. In that regard, stepping back from ourself and looking at our life objectively, as if watching a movie, can help us gain a perspective as to where and how we've been. This can benefit us in terms of our relationship and our role in them. Now, this is sometimes difficult to accomplish, and in the short run, can lead to some pain as we review our life. Though, without this knowledge, we can't grow and be the person we want to be. And that person that effectively shows the world who we are. We must make ourselves a priority, not in the clinical or narcissistic sense. We don't need to pathologize this, but rather showing ourselves and the world who we are without conflict, anger, or despair. I hope that you've learned something new. I hope that it encourages you to practice assertiveness, to be yourself, and most important, to protect your personal boundaries at all costs. Because at the end of the day, that's all we have. It is our sense of self. And what's more important than that? Remember, we're brought into this world and we leave this world, and we must have a sense of self. We must have a positive sense of self. So I'm Dr. Gerry Fishkin, and this is my sidekick, my four-legged son, Jamie. So until next time, I'm Dr. Gerry Fishkin, wishing you love, happiness, good health, and all of our best. You can also contact me at drgerry@drgeraldfishkin.com. Take care.